down that camera and strap in. It's time for another episode of TOGCHAT Live. Get ready for 60 minutes of wall-to-wall photography, including photo news and tips, along with your photography questions in real time, with answers from your host, Olympus visionary, Joe Edelman.
Don't you just hate it when you click the wrong button? Hey gang, it's Wednesday, so it must be time for our weekly photography chat. Thanks for joining me, as always, for this live YouTube edition of TOGCHAT. As you know, my mission is to help photographers like you to develop a better understanding of the hows and whys behind great photography. So I got a really special night lined up for you, gang, but before we get going, I need all of you, please take a moment. Tell your photography friends that we are streaming live on YouTube right now. As always, Twitter, Facebook, they are the easiest way to get the word out. Or you can go ahead and you can click the share button like right down there in that neighborhood. I just pasted the link in the chat window for you. And of course, some of you have already started, but we've got photographers tuning in from all over the world, which is so cool. So please check in, leave a comment, let me know you're here and where you're watching from. And even though this is a special night with a really special interview, go ahead and start posting your questions for tonight's TOG Q&A. I will do my best to answer them. So I've got a special treat, but after that, we're still going to do the Q&A. So I've said it 3 times already. Tonight, I've got something really special for you. Yesterday, I had the incredible opportunity to interview one of my first and probably biggest photography idols. A man who I had the opportunity to see in action when I was 16 years old. His name, Mr. David Hume Kennerly. Now, just a little background for those of you that don't know. David Hume Kennerly has been a photographer on the front lines of history for more than 50 years. At 25 years old, he was one of the youngest winners of the Pulitzer Prize in journalism. Kennerly's 1972 award for feature photography included images from the Vietnam and Cambodian wars, refugees escaping from East Pakistan into India, and the Ali versus Frazier Fight of the Century World Championship that was held at Madison Square Garden. 2 years after winning that Pulitzer, Kennedy was appointed President Gerald R. Ford's personal White House photographer. In fact, he was the chief photographer of the White House staff. Kennerly's photos have appeared in more than 50 major magazine covers. He's documented history in over 100 countries, and he has photographed 10 United States presidents and covered even more presidential campaigns. He served as a contributing editor for Newsweek magazine for 10 years and a contributing photographer for Time and Life magazines for more than 15. American Photography magazine named Kennerly one of the 100 most important people in photography. And Washingtonian magazine called Kennerly one of the 50 most important journalists in Washington, D.C. Now, his work has been exhibited widely, and he does maintain a busy publishing appearance and lecture schedule. But a highlight is in 2019, the University of Arizona, the Center for Creative Photography, acquired the David Hume Kennerly Archive, which features almost 1 million images, prints, objects, memorabilia, correspondence, and documents dating all the way back to 1957. His work now joins that of Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, Richard Avedon, W. Eugene Smith, and scores of other legendary photographers. Kennedy has published several books with his work: Shooter, Photo Op, Sign Off, The Final Days of Seinfeld, Photo de Jour, Extraordinary Circumstances, The Presidency of Gerald R. Ford, and, more recently, David Hume Kennerly on the iPhone. Kennerly also works extensively in corporate photography, has a decade-long relationship with Bank of America, and some of his most published photographs are those that are appearing on the millions of Girl Scout cookie boxes. So this is a 60-minute interview, and Mr. Kennerly was very gracious with his time. Pay attention. You're going to hear some really cool stories behind the scenes of history, as well as some very valuable lessons that can help you with your photography if you are willing to put in the work. Mr. Kennerly also graciously gave me permission to include some of his photographs in the interview, but I've only included a few. I want to encourage you to visit his website and the Kennerly Archive website at the University of Arizona and look at his work firsthand. I have links to those websites that are in the description below the video already, and once the interview starts, I'll go ahead and I'll drop them here in the chat window for you so you'll be able to check them out. I'm going to do a 30-minute Q&A after the interview, and stay tuned. A lot of you have asked for this. I will share my photos that I took of President Gerald R. Ford on the evening of October 27th, 1976, the night that I saw David Hume Kennerly in action. So with that being said, I would be completely remiss if I didn't honestly just say to you, thank you for being a photographer, and thank you for the body of work that you have assembled, and for the work ethic that it took to build that body of work. I mean, I sincerely, and I not to build you up too much, but I do sincerely feel that it's unparalleled in today's world. When I was doing a little bit of research, since I knew that I would have the chance to talk to you, I came across two quotes that I found really perfect. One is yours, but the first one is actually from the actor James Earl Jones, where he stated that David Hume Kennerly is like Forrest Gump, except he really was there. And honestly, I find that really sums things up incredibly well, in the sense that you have witnessed and photographed so much history. But that brings me to my first question. There's a quote that's attributed to you. It's on your Canon Explorers of Light page. And it says, "In photography, everything can be taught except how to see. When I see it, I get it." That's the quote. Can I get you to expand on that and give me a little bit more meat to that? Because I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Well, yeah, and I think right now on my, I started a group on Facebook called the Kennerly Photo Fitness Workout. The idea of that is we always have to work in familiar situations, and you kind of become inured to what's around. And so in other words, you look at things every day that you never really see. And so the idea of this photo fitness workout, which I started like 3 or 4 years ago, just for the hell of it, kind of an exercise and teaching really, is train yourself to pay more attention, is what it boils down to.
Okay.
And just be keenly aware of your surroundings, and all of a sudden a real familiar situation might produce a photo of some kind. And you being a professional photographer, you understand that, we get paid for the way we see things. That's,
yep.
I mean, there are a lot of great photographers, a lot of good photographers, but it's really your point of view that gets hired. And I found that's been the story of my life. And so what is the point of view? Like this exercise we're doing now on Facebook, it's called the Kennerly Photo Fitness Workout group. And there were like 2 people on it from 3 years ago, but I never really started it. And so then I spun it up with the coronavirus thing, where people are at home and in their neighborhood and all that. So I said, here's the exercise. Every day, let's just start a group. And so now I've got about 700 or 800 people joined in about 2 weeks.
Cool.
I can't even look at all. There are like thousands of photos going on there,
Yep.
some better than others,
Yep.
obviously. But it's fun exercise. And
Sure.
So it's getting people excited about photography and seeing things in a different way. And I guess the point I was making is, if I'm looking for a photo, I'm going to find it. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm walking down the street every day looking to make a picture, because I'm not,
Right.
But if I'm on the case, if I really start looking down at a bug, at a flower, at a contrail, an odd tree branch or whatever it is, it excites me to take good pictures. I've been doing it now for like 55 years, I think, and counting. And the excitement factor, the curiosity factor, like what makes me better than other people. I don't quit. Somebody asked me this question the other day. So, in one word, describe how you do it. And it has to be perseverance. Never give up, never quit. Just keep going ahead until you get what you want. And I mean, photography is easy for me on one hand, but it's really difficult on another because you always have to produce.
Right. So
I try.
I mean, I definitely. Oh, you've certainly done that. I would also, one of the, I guess one label that I would give you also is to say that you are, in looking at your body of work and even going back to much of your early work, you really are kind of a master of the ideal moment. What I personally love about your work is, not only am I viewing history through your eyes and your experiences, but I'm viewing all kinds of moments. There's so much emotion, and you talk about that in some of the interviews that you've done. But I'm curious a little bit about your process. And, obviously, you started photography, at a time long before, like me, there were no motor drives. So, in fact, I know that at one point you even worked with twin lens reflex cameras. But now that we have, motor drives and we have cameras that can shoot at these incredibly high frame rates, when you're in the room with many of these political figures, or when you're doing things like covering the Democratic National Convention and the great images that you had of Hillary Clinton, or even like the funeral of Senator John McCain, what is your approach in terms of that moment? Like, so many photographers today have kind of the mentality of shoot everything, shoot heavy, just keep shooting, and there's bound to be, a series of pictures in there.
Right.
And I know, at least when I learned, and I have a feeling when you learned, we were kind of a lot more selective. I mean, we were always on the lookout. What is your approach, and has it changed because of the technology?
Yeah, it has not really changed at all. When I started in high school, my first published photo was like 1962.
Okay.
And in that was Roseburg, Oregon, the school newspaper, and they had the camera for the journalism department was a 4x5 speed graphic.
Wow.
There's no better way to learn than that, because you have
right.
one shot and you flip the holder, put it in, you get another shot. But it was really an economical way of shooting, and you've got to wait for the moment. And I think that's part of why I learned from all these photographers who were 4x5 guys. When I started in the middle 60s,
right?
Yes, 35 millimeter had taken over, but there were Rolleiflexes and all that. But the big lesson was you don't overshoot, and there's no right or wrong to the number of images. And I get asked all the time, like, how many pictures does it take to make a good one?
Right.
It takes one, and that's it.
Yep.
And so, but if it takes 100 to get there, that's fine. But the fact is, it's not like monkeys in a room on typewriters. You're going to ultimately get a great novel. You won't. You'll get gibberish.
Sure.
And photographic gibberish is the same thing. And we see it every day on Facebook and with the, ever-present camera phones and all that. There are millions of pictures being taken every minute. I've always been, my training was wait for the moment. What's the story? It makes the editor's life easier. If you come in off an assignment, or in those days with a roll or two of film, and somebody else brings in 10 rolls, they're going to look at your stuff first, particularly if they know you're on it.
Right.
And so you've got to really be thinking about, why are you taking this picture? I did a book called David Hume Kennerly on the iPhone. And that wasn't really about iPhone pictures as much as it was about what's my process of taking photos. Right. And it's a combination of an economical way of shooting with stringent editing. And like, what are you putting up there? And I also learned when I was turning prints into the editors on the newspaper, you don't give them 10 or 15 prints. You give them usually, well, as one guy did it, like 3 8x10s and 11x14 is the one you like because it's a bigger picture and you get the attention. But it's really like knowing your audience, but you have to deliver the goods of whatever the assignment is. But, you know, I got published all the time because I had good pictures, but they were thoughtful photographs. It was of the moment. And I don't see how you can shoot like just bang, 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 bang. I mean, it's a bad habit, really. Sure. Because you're not really looking for what you're doing. I'm like I'm like active radar when I'm trying to shoot. I'm just like always looking for, and it's about angles, it's about moments, it's about the composition. So those things kind of intersect at the same time.
That brings up an interesting question in that, you know, for as long as you have been a photographer and essentially, especially, let's talk about Washington and politics, because that's been such a huge part of your career.
Yeah.
Do you ever, well, actually, let me rephrase that. How much planning do you do? So this coronavirus ends and you're back out on the road and you're going to go photograph this election season's Democratic National Convention, let's say. You've done that before. You've covered those events before. So just because you're human, there's a certain expectation of things that will happen, of visuals that will be there, especially given your experience. How do you prep yourself, or do you prep yourself? Is it really just a matter of showing up and living in the moment? How do you approach that?
That's a good question. I think, well, this will be my 13th presidential campaign.
Okay.
If they have it. So, yeah, the convention's like a circus. You go in and it's one ring over here, one ring over there.
Right.
I mean, you know what the big moments are, some of the important speakers, for instance. But the big moment is when whomever gets the nomination appears, and then they make their speech, and then you have the balloons and all that. What I really prefer is hopefully getting backstage before the speech, or seeing what people are going through in their preparation. I think my career has been really based on both sides of it, from having good access, and getting the in the room kind of stuff that other people aren't seeing, the anxiety before the speech. Those kind of things really are what makes it for me. On the other hand, if it doesn't work out that way, and that last time around I didn't have much access, I did Trump. I was with Trump election night, but Hillary at her convention and some campaigning. Didn't get a lot of access, some. But I think then when it's away from the cameras and the recordings is where you make some more significant photos. But I also enjoy the spectacle. I mean, in a way, it's like going to a Catholic church ceremony with all the, you know, the bells and whistles and the religion of it, and how is that shown. And I like that. I mean, I made a lot of good pictures of those kind of moments, like particularly with Hillary, the first woman who was a candidate from a major party to get the presidential nomination for the Democrats. I mean, that was huge in a way. That moment is what was really counted, and I think I did well with that. And it's also knowing what's going to happen. I mean, a good sports photographer is going to understand how certain plays normally unfold, or at least you have to know the game to get really good pictures. I mean, you can get lucky. I mean, if I walked into a cricket game, like not knowing what cricket was, you could probably get good pictures because you would have such an odd view of it. because it's an odd thing to watch anyway. But on the other hand, if it's day in and day out, you're competing with all these other good photographers.
Right.
So knowing the game, whether it's sports or politics, having some sense of who the players are, how do they react to stuff. There's a lot of psychology involved with it. And another thing, when I was with Time Magazine, particularly, I had just a good example is going to Israel on an assignment to photograph Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister. I didn't know much about him, but he'd written a book called The Revolt, and outlining his days in the Irgun, fighting the Brits for independence and all that. So by reading the book, I discovered in this person's own words, like what he'd been through, his attitude, the kind of person he was. He was, he had a sense of humor, I discovered. And one of the things they did was that they blew up a wing of the King David Hotel with the British soldiers were in there, and these revolutionaries. And so when I met Begin, the first thing I said, I'm staying at the King David and I sleep better at night knowing you're the prime minister. And he thought that was really funny, because although it was a kind of a nasty event,
right?
But it showed that I paid attention, and I wanted to know who he was. The worst thing is to walk into a room and have no idea who these people are,
right?
Because you look stupid that way, and you don't. So the more you know about your subjects, the better your photos are going to be. I guess that's the lesson.
So actually, that was a great segue to the next question I was going to ask you. Since my first example was about kind of big events, when you're doing an exclusive, when you're working one-on-one, you've just described part of your process, which is obviously the more you know about the person, the better. Do you do any other prep? Like, for instance, if you were going to go back to the Oval Office tomorrow to do a shoot, you've been there God knows how many times and taken how many pictures in there. Is there any kind of a thought process in terms of the visual that you're going to kind of pre-establish? And this would be for an exclusive to make a portrait or an environmental portrait, not for photographing a news event. Or do you really try to kind of keep it more in the moment and focus on the interaction? I've read quotes of yours where you make the analogy of being photographed as kind of like going to the dentist. And your goal is...
Right, if you're sitting somebody down for a picture, Like portraits are such an important part of what you do as a commercial photographer. Like my biggest client is Bank of America, and I've been doing work for them for 10 years. I've all their top-level executive portraits. And I think, what's the expression? You only get one chance to make a first impression.
Yep.
But if you think about it, the first impression that most people make is through a photograph of them that people see, if you're an executive or a politician or whomever. But so I think what I try to get to in a portrait session, this is not like necessarily the Oval Office and all of that, but with the CEO of Bank of America and an assistant who worked with me said, I don't understand it. You're only going to have 15 minutes with this guy, but you spent 5 minutes talking to him.
Yeah.
I said, well, then what happened? He said, well, he was relaxed. And I said, I don't need a lot of time to do it. I already have an idea of how I'm going to attempt it with lighting and all that.
Sure.
Minor lighting, just whatever I'm doing.
Right.
But the most important thing is like, who is their person? What's their personality? Who are they? Can you get to the core of who they are? And particularly for an executive, and I got to know these people. Now I know them really well. But then it's like showing someone that you think is an approachable person, and they're warm and friendly naturally. But it's hard to convey that in a photo because you're uptight, and just in the relaxed mode, I spend usually more time talking to them than I do shooting.
Yep.
And invariably it works out. I mean, I had a photo session with Donald Trump 2 weeks after he was elected president in his office at Trump Tower.
Now, is this the famous shot that's used on CNN that you're talking about?
Yeah, the nonstop.
Right.
It's the branded image of Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But so I had almost no time. It turned out because in the camera, you could see from the beginning frame to the last frame exactly how long the session was. It was like 2 minutes.
Right.
But in that 2 minutes, and he's a pro. I mean, worked very well. I mean, he knows how he looks, and the guy's is used to this. And his face is his brand, and his attitude is his brand. Yep. So I knew that, and so when he sat down, at first he's smiling, and I just thought it didn't look real. I mean, it was just like, okay, I've got my smile. You know how little kids do it. Yep. Like they go, and it looks not good.
Right.
And, and so I said, okay, I said, well, let's try. I said, I didn't say uncomfortable, but I just said the talk. I said, okay, that's good. Well, why don't you give me the "you're fired" look from The Apprentice? And he goes,
that's
like
it.
that.
There you go.
And I shot a couple of frames like that. I said, well, that's pretty scary. I don't think we're looking for that. How about just relax a little bit? And which he did. And basically it went from smiling to scowling.
Right.
Sort of the way that Yusuf Karsh had the Churchill photo where he takes his cigar out and he gets a scowl. And that's the famous one, you know. And but after like 6 or 7 frames, and Trump said, "Do you mind if I see what you're doing?" And I said, "Sure, I'll do that if somebody asks. I don't do it otherwise." Normally. But he looks in the back of the camera, and he said, "Oh, I look better there than I do in real life." And I said, "So you're not going to fire Jared, huh?" Because Jared's the one that set up this appointment.
Cool.
He said, no, he'll be okay. And it was actually friendly,
Yeah.
So we finished the session, 17 frames.
Really?
And I knew I had it. I knew it.
Yeah.
And so then I said, thank you very much, because he was busy and running behind and all that. And one of the people who was there from CNN said, we were going to do this other setup. I said, let's get out of here while the getting's good.
Right.
Because then I could have gotten into a situation where it would have been pushing it.
Right.
I said, we have the photo. Yep. I know it. I'm confident of this. So, and so it was. And we went immediately back. And that picture was the cover of the second edition of the book for his inauguration. Mm-hmm. And even though he tweeted that it was the worst picture of him ever on the cover, he had looked at the first cover. I happen to know this is what happened, although he never clarified what it was. Right. But then to prove it, somebody had seen him a couple of weeks after it came out, said he had like 20 books on his desk in his office at Trump Tower and signing them for everybody. But it was a good picture of him. Yeah. And I think a genuine picture. Wasn't, in my philosophy, don't try to make them look good or bad, but just try to, who are they? What? I don't do cheap shots of people, like deliberately anyway.
Right. Well, you talk about that in one of the interviews that I read, where you try not to go into a session with someone, whether actually it's covering a news event or having an exclusive, but try not to go in with a preconceived notion. Which I think every good photojournalist should be doing, of course, but you find that
but you have a notion.
well, right. And that's where I was headed, is like, do you find that gets harder the longer you're in the business?
No, it's a great question, because, if you read my Twitter feed and all that, I've just gone way over the line out of impartial objectivity, and I'm not working for anybody now, and I don't. I've come to really not like the President of the United States a bit. I covered him a lot. It would be, that whole anti-media thing. It really boils down to First Amendment issues for me. where you're attacking the free press for expressing their right as a free press, or anybody to say anything, really. I mean, look, there's not one president who's liked most of what's written about him. President Ford, whom I knew really well, and I was with him day in and day out, would get frustrated and angry occasionally about stories that were written. And I knew they weren't true or they were off or whatever. It happens every single day. However, the difference was he got over it. He said, look, it's frustrating, but he understood it. He actually got along with the press corps, respected them, understood that they were constitutionally endowed to do this job.
Right.
And if you think about my career, some of my career was spent in combat, like going out under fire and photographing troops, because I wanted to show what they were going through. It wasn't about me; it was about them. And a lot of my colleagues were killed getting the story. And so when somebody attacks sort of in an ad hominem way, my colleagues and the profession I'm in and calling it fake news and all that, it gets me really pissed off.
Sure.
I mean, I will freely admit that. And like Trump always says, well, I hit back. If somebody hits me, I hit them back. Well, he's the one hitting all the time. He's throwing the first punch all the time. And so getting back to your question, if I were to walk into the Oval Office right now to photograph Trump, I really do have the ability to kind of throw that out.
Good.
And just like photograph him the way he is, even if I'm really unhappy with this person or if I personally don't like them, it's really irrelevant. And in a way, one of the things I hate about Twitter, it's sort of like having a drug habit. You've got the good angels here, the bad angels here. They say, Dave, say something really bad about him. Dave, don't do it. All right, I'm going to go. I mean, it's like this cauldron of negativity, and it almost makes you do it. And so it's really a bad habit. And I constantly reprimand myself because honestly, it's better not to know what you're thinking of when you're photographing people.
Sure.
If they think you're on their side or against them. And I've crossed the line. I freely admit it. And I shouldn't do it. But on the other hand, this is what the world we're living in, and I've succumbed to it. However, I truly believe I've retained an objectivity in my photography. That I'm not out to get him. I wouldn't do that to Trump or anybody. It doesn't matter whether I like him or not. To answer your question,
given your career, Pulitzer, being the chief White House photographer, and you photographed, is it 10 U.S. presidents?
Yeah, I think it's 10. The first one was Nixon, but then I photographed LBJ in 1970 when he did an event in Washington, D.C. And I just found those pictures the other day. It was a UPI thing. And I knew I'd done it, but I couldn't find the pictures. And I couldn't remember what the event was. It was just one of those things. And but it's in my mind. So finally, I was able to find the event. And it was LBJ at the dedication of a portrait of Harry Truman at the National Portrait Gallery. And so it's not a great shot. It's not a bad picture, but it's him looking at the portrait of Truman.
Cool.
And what's important about that photo was, it's the only time I ever saw Lyndon Johnson. But the other thing, Harry Truman was the president the year I was born. So it kind of brought those two elements together.
That's
neat. But that was a one-off on LBJ, but a lot of heavy coverage, obviously, with Nixon, Ford, Carter to a degree, a lot of Reagan, and all the others. I mean, I have a real strong body of work of presidents.
So, I mean, obviously, with this career, you're certainly at a point in life where you could just be resting on your accomplishments and enjoying retirement, but you still do work. You're still very active. So I'm curious, if you could have an exclusive with anyone today, whether it's political or otherwise, because obviously you haven't just photographed politicians, you've photographed entertainers, all kinds of people. Who would it be? And On top of that,
I can tell you.
who would it be?
It would be Kim Jong-un.
Really? So now,
Yeah, because I've been in North Korea. I was there in 1997 for
Really?
like 2 days.
okay,
It's fascinating because it's really it is the only sort of hermetically sealed country that's left.
Yep.
And so because of that intrigues me.
okay,
And because of this is a powerful guy, and he's kind of an eccentric person, but he lives in his own world, and I'm fascinated by that. And I was always fascinated, like the people who I wanted to photograph were really the ones you could never get to. I had almost got a picture of Mao Zedong when Ford visited in 1975, but they wouldn't allow me to go in there, even as the chief
okay,
White House photographer. That was very disappointing,
right,
because Mao had been photographed by outsiders for probably 20 years at that point.
right,
Any reclusive person who was interested, Howard Hughes would have been one. I mean, that would have been a grand slam home run to do a photograph of Howard Hughes, because he just was, in hiding, really.
right,
Any interested, I mean, like the leaders I photographed that I look back and said, these are really interesting people. Like Fidel Castro was great. Brezhnev was great. I like Gorbachev. Leaders that are hard to get to have always been more fascinating.
right.
So the only one on the planet right now is Kim Jong-un, really.
That's very true. Yeah.
I mean, and we see him. I mean, Trump went to meet with him. But what I would like is a day in the life of Kim Jong-un. What is he doing all day? Is he, or just his process? I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
And he's got a nuke, apparently. So, this is, a guy with some weight, literally and figuratively. But he's, I'm fascinated with him.
Very cool. So now, I mean, that being said, then since Donald Trump traveled there, or traveled to meet him at least, did you have any interest in that assignment, or was that something that you tried to?
Well, I mean, it just wasn't going to happen. So, I mean, if I really try to make something happen, I'll do it.
Right.
I haven't really, and I've been thinking about that, making an official request to go photograph Kim Jong-un.
Okay.
But on the other hand, there's a certain degree of difficulty, not just getting it, but like what did, if they want me just to stay there forever,
right.
I mean, I'm not too concerned about that, but it's always something to think about.
Sure.
There's no, I mean, I think if they invited you there and knowing how I am as a professional, I think it would work out fine.
Sure.
But just to take his picture, and he's been out there a lot.
Right.
I'm talking about something that would be
exclusive.
revealing about him as a person. I think that would be the distinction.
Cool. It's funny, you in your comments, you keep coming back and talking about people, and that was what made photography a career for me. Because even after leaving photojournalism, everything I've done throughout my career, it's been around people. I was a really shy kid, and I figured out in junior high school that people would talk to me when I went to take pictures for the yearbook because I was the photographer. So the camera for me was always access. It's access to people. It's access to even to be able to speak to someone like you, which is just incredible. So I am curious.
By the way, just while you're on that, so I grew up in this little lumber town in Oregon, and I think I don't know if I was shy or not, but growing up, the same kids on the block.
Right.
We had a couple of good friends, and you have those relationships where you like some people better than others, and all that. But the camera was a real ticket for me, exactly that way, where I could, like in my case, give me an excuse to talk to girls. I took their pictures of the cheerleaders, and I could get out of class.
Do you mean I wasn't the only one that did that? Yeah.
No. That was all very important. I get out of class to do it. and I was a lousy student. I mean, I suppose today I would have been diagnosed as attention deficit disorder or whatever you call it. And so, because I was more interested in what was going on outside the window than what was going on in the classroom. So I was like a solid C student because I really had other things on my mind. And but that the camera was the ticket. It would overcome like shyness and other things, and then everybody wanted the pictures.
Yep.
And it was funny because Yoichi Okamoto, who was LBJ's photographer, who is the gold standard of presidential photography, he was the guy who I admired more than anybody. He's the best presidential photographer ever.
Really?
And that includes me and Sousa and Draper and McNeely, everybody. We're all good to a degree, but not as good as he was. Plus, he had a great subject on top of it. But I'll never forget, he was the first person I sought advice from when I got the job as Ford's White House photographer. And I said, we're having lunch at the White House, and I said, so tell me, like, what do I have to look out for? What are the highs and lows? He said, I'll tell you the thing that's most important. Everybody's going to want to be your friend because you're a friend of the president, which I was. Yep. And he said the other part of it is everybody wants the pictures. Everybody wants the pictures. So they want the shots. So they're going to be nice to you. You're going to think you're the most popular guy around. And it's because they want the pictures. And that was a pretty cynical attitude, but he was entirely correct.
Sure.
He said, all these people who are your friends here, wait till you get out of the White House and try to get a hold of them. Good luck. Yeah. And so you know what? That really put it in perspective for me. And I didn't take it as cynically as that. Right. But he was essentially correct about it. And like, for instance, I used to get invitations because I'm the White House photographer to go to all these embassy parties and, the all these great affairs, they're like, and because I was in the Washington Post, people knew who I was. I'm 27 years old. I'm a bachelor. I'm dating Candace Bergen. Everybody thought I was cool. But I kind of listened to what Oki said, and I just turned all that down because it wasn't a real world for me. Plus, I was working my ass off taking pictures. Sure. But the only time I accepted when I went to the I think National Day at the Soviet Embassy, because I said it was like sort of I'm always fascinated by like commies, like the personality cults of like Mao Zedong, and, like the great shows that they put on. I did one of those, and I thought Dobrynin was an interesting guy. He was the ambassador, but it really. I mean, it's like kind of a never land existence in that case. Right.
Very cool. So, I mean, in your career, obviously, you've worked for a lot of prestigious publications, and with your accolades. In, I guess, if we were to say the last 20 years, you have also kind of witnessed firsthand a lot of the demise of newspapers in our country, and some would say, some would call it an evolution. I'm not sure how much it's evolving, but the evolution of print journalism, for better or for worse.
It's more of a devolution, I think.
That's probably actually a great way to put it. But I'm curious, given your experience and your historical experience, if you were to predict the future, where do you think photojournalism is going, or how do you think it's going to evolve from where it is today? And maybe even from the standpoint of technology, the tools that we use to actually do our jobs. What do you see happening?
I mean, it's a great question because I'm an old newspaper guy. I started with the Oregon Journal, the Oregonian, and then the Wire Service. Actually, people ask me, like, how do you, because I don't really like the term photojournalist so much. I mean, we end up using it, but I don't, I don't really like it. I like being a photographer, and I'm a wire guy at heart because being a wire service photographer, you had to cover every conceivable kind of a stories, everything from sports to politics to this to that.
Right.
You know, maybe 7-8 assignments a day, and very competitive, and get the pictures out. Well, this is certainly way predates digital.
Right.
But to your question, I think that nothing has really changed in terms of what are we trying to do. We're trying to tell the story, to cover news, to bring our own unique perspective to it. When I made that jump over from film to digital, and a lot of my colleagues didn't, I've always kind of been on the younger end of whom the people I would consider to be my contemporaries.
Right.
You know, like been like Wally McNamee and Dirk Hallstead and all those guys. Wally's unfortunately gone now, but you know, Dirk is who was a mentor to me. Really was probably 12 years older than me, but I was the youngest member of that pack of like the big time photographers, Eddie Adams and all. You know, we're all kind of doing the same thing. We're all wire people or former wire people, and but yes, the technology's changed. I was an old dog who learned new digital tricks. I wanted to stay in the business, and so I learned it. And once I realized, I mean, I'm not really doing anything differently in terms of how I see things, and how. But the vehicle for getting them out faster, it's changed everything, you know. And I was asked a good question by a Marine general, and I gave a lecture for wounded Marines, and I was doing workshops for them, and he said, when I showed some of these photos, like you know, they're Sadat at the pyramids, and like Gorbachev and Reagan, and all the traveling and covering all the stories all over the world, and the Queen of England and the White House, and on. He asked a question that I'd never really thought about, which was, could anybody today do what you did? And that was a great question, because then it goes to the economics of the business. It goes to the people you're working for who would actually assign you. Like, there was a period where I went back and forth to Cairo 3 times in 1 month from Washington, D.C., and I would fly the Concorde over to London and take like a British Air flight to Cairo. And nobody today would pay for this kind of a thing. And plus, all the pictures are getting beamed up right after they happen. If you saw Gaddafi being dragged to the streets, I mean, there are people right there. You're not going to be there for that unless you happen to be overcovered that story. The odds are not. So then, when it comes to news, I mean, news is being photographed every second and uploaded to Facebook and taken by people. So all that, the complexion of it's changed. But the kind of stories I would be doing, like Inside with Begin in Israel, or with Sadat, or with, you know, wherever I'm going on assignment, it would cost a fortune to send people around to do photos. Nobody's spending that kind of money these days. There are very few photographers that are traveling. Maybe Jim Knockway's getting good assignments. There are a few. But mainly they're with the wires. The magazines don't have budgets anymore, if they even exist. And so, so one of the reasons my archive is so valuable is it exists with all these different things in it that are important historically. But also, I own most of the copyrights to them. So. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, but my archive now is at the Center for Creative Photography.
That was actually going to be my next question for you, because I'm very disappointed. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that everything changes, because my wife and I were planning a trip to Arizona in August. She's a college professor, so we were going to go right before she went back to school for the fall, so that I could visit your archive and see all the work there. So obviously I'm hoping things work out.
You know what? I mean, it's not going anywhere, which is the beauty of the archive. But that would be, and just let me know when you want to do that, because because it's just recently gone there. And it's almost like 1 million items if you add up negatives, transparencies, prints, other memorabilia, all the.
And so how much of that is actually accessible to the public?
Well, I mean, it will be, but I think accessibility will depend really on how much of it gets scanned. So you can sit right there and look at it if you wanted to. And if you put it into a historical context, I mean, I think that's the most important thing about it. But that's an ongoing situation. But the archive was founded by Ansel Adams, or the Center for Creative Photography was founded by Ansel Adams and John Schaefer, who was the president of the University of Arizona, saying, if you put your archive here in Arizona, we will build a building for it and for you.
Right.
You know, and that was 1975. And Ansel and I were friends in 1979. I have the letter, which is now in the archive, saying that they would like to acquire my archive and would I consider putting it there. And I was saying, you know, I've only been out of high school like 11 years or something. It just it was way premature for me.
Right.
But Eugene Smith is there, and Adams, Edward Weston, and Avedon, and all these Gary Winogrand, a lot of really terrific photographers. And it's the right place, and it's not going to just be shelved. I mean, it's going to be used through in an interdisciplinary way, with history and certainly the journalism and all that, but it's got a bigger scope than that.
Sure. No, I mean, it looks absolutely incredible. I've been spending quite a bit of time there in the last couple of days, just looking through things, and I had already been following you on social media when it was kind of coming to fruition. So I was, very aware of it and excited that it was, that was happening. So speaking of the archive, I did learn one thing about you that I had never seen in an interview before or never read, and I stumbled on this while looking through one of the galleries in the archive.
Like an old police report of some kind?
Not an old police report, but I mean, it does have to do with law enforcement, actually. So I noticed a little shot that you had that had all of the Secret Service call signs. And while you were in the White House, your Secret Service call sign was Hot Shot. Did you get to pick that, or did somebody pick it for you?
Right. Now, that just so to clarify what that is. So everybody from and by the way, those names were assigned by the White House Communications Agency, not the Secret Service. So the president, I think, was Passkey. Mine was Hot Shot. And I think they gave it to me because it was funny because it really was kind of a combination of my personality and the fact that I was a photographer. But so when the Secret Service would say, we're Passkey's moving, blah, 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 whatever, they would never use their name. So any senior staff member had his own call sign, the First Lady, and all of that. But that name they gave me. And it was funny. It was appropriate. It was amusing. And that's all the kind of things in the archive. Really cool material like that. Because those were like, they weren't secret documents, but they were administratively held. They weren't out there in the public. So
no, it's very cool. So when you were,
it's so for as a high point in my life. And it was there was a lot of competition for this archive. We were in discussions in various ways with Yale and Stanford and USC. A private individual offered me a lot of money for it. But the main thing was having it in a place that would utilize it so students could study it. And that archive was the culmination of my wife, Rebecca, really pushing, organizing it. And we put a lot of time and money and effort over 10 or 15 years. But the single most important thing outside of the fact that I did what I did, all the kind of material that's in there, is that I own most of it. And that's so awesome. That allowed me to actually make the sale of it, and there was due diligence on did I own everything I said I did.
Right.
The Ford White House stuff is public domain.
Right.
The UPI years are, went from UPI to Bettman to Corbis to another entity run by Getty right now, where I didn't technically own that. Okay. But we have access to it. Good. So, but the vast majority of everything, because I didn't do work for hire, I wouldn't take a job unless I owned the copyright. Right. And so that made it extremely valuable, considering what it was. Right. And if I were a New York Times photographer, Washington Post photographer, they don't own that material. So you couldn't really say what's going to happen to it. Right. So I was also reading, in addition to your wife being the person that really pushed the project forward, that she's also the hero that saved much of that work from a flood in your basement. Is that true? Yes. And if you go on Kennerly.com, you'll see the story she wrote about in our apartment. I had all these boxes in kind of in a storeroom. Yep. And I was out of town on an assignment, and she called me. It was kind of a panic and said, there's a flood in the basement. What's in all those boxes? I said, well, those are, my pictures. Right. She said, well, like what? I said, well, like my archive, like negatives, transparent. She goes, oh my God. Yeah. And anyway, she saved all that stuff. And it was at that point she said, we have to do something about this. And this has to be properly set up. Yeah. And so really, not only with that act, which was really saved everything, but it was also then what is going to happen to the stuff. I'm just one of those kind of people who I'm more interested in what I'm going to do next or what I'm going to do at the moment. That I was not as visionary about what I'd done is about what I wanted to do. And, and she provided that. I think that history owes a debt to your wife, for sure. 100%. Yeah. I mean, and I don't just say that stuff to be the little lady, she is a strong force in my life and the life of our two sons and plus my oldest son. And, she's a writer. She's working on a big book project right now. She used to write screenplays. She's way smarter than I am, but she also had the ability to see what could happen. And there was no guarantee of whether it's going to be given away or sold or whatever. I mean, that was, we never knew what was going to happen for sure, but we were ready for it. Yeah. No, I for one, I'm really glad that it was preserved because I think it's just, your body of work is just incredible. So you've been very generous with your... Just quickly, but after that, so we rented we had an apartment in Santa Monica, big, but then it was a small apartment building, and we took another unit where we had the whole archive there and had people working on it. And it was, but it wasn't fireproof or it was not even insurable really. So it was a huge sigh of relief to have the vast majority of everything finally shipped over to Arizona. So now it's safe and sound no matter what happens to anybody. I can only imagine. And you've been so generous with your time. I have just a couple quick questions I want to finish with. Sure. With regards to gear, so actually shooting, obviously, I know you shot with many different cameras, but you're a Canon shooter at this point. What are your go-to lenses? Are you, pretty much a prime guy? Do you rely mostly on zooms? Yeah, it's until I started using Canon in 1975, I never used a zoom. Okay. Previously, I'd used Nikon cameras. Practically from high school all the way through 1995. Right. It's hard to believe it's been that long now. I've been using Canons, but when they came out with the autofocus lenses, that was the conversion. It was like finding a different kind of a religion, really, for me. And, I get paid to give talks for them and all
Sure.
that, but you couldn't pay me enough to endorse a camera that didn't work for me. I make more money on one day of shooting than I get from them in a year.
Right.
But to me, it's the best product, and I'm not putting anybody else's stuff down because it's just there's so much great gear out there.
Mm-hmm.
But the Canon, one thing I use, it just happened, one of them's right in front of me. This one is the 5D SR.
Yep.
Which is a huge file. It's like 48 megabyte file.
Yep.
The 1 to 400 millimeter lens.
Okay.
To me, this is my favorite lens because I like, sort of my hobby is photographing birds and animals and stuff like that. So I usually carry a couple of 5DSR bodies, but I have the EOS R mirrorless cameras.
I was going to ask about that.
Really
Do you see yourself maybe making the change to mirrorless down the road?
It's entirely possible because what I was using with the EOS R is they have this 51.2 lens.
Yep.
It's just an incredible lens. It's so much fun to shoot with because for portraits and for all sorts of stuff. But the other lens I probably use a lot would be the like 24 to 70 lens.
Okay.
85 1.2 lens. I like prime lenses.
Okay.
But the zooms are so good, It's I did a moonshot when they had the solar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
I had an 800 millimeter Canon, shot it up in Oregon. But I like to work light. I don't carry a lot of gear around because I don't use the top end Canon cameras because they're heavier and they're fast. They're great for sports because you're getting 15, 20 frames a second.
Right.
But again, I just don't shoot like that, so it's not a big problem.
Yeah.
But I love these. The image quality on those cameras is fantastic.
That's awesome. So, given your
I'm not much of a gearhead. I guess that's how you.
I'm with you.
I never have been.
I totally understand. Believe me. So, what advice would you give to a young photographer that is, looking at the idea of maybe having a career? And I would actually ask you for two pieces of advice from that one question. One with regards to the idea of just learning photography and learning how to become a capable photographer. And then the other answer with regards to building a career as a photographer. And I realize there's some overlap, but what advice would you give to a young person today?
Well, it would be real easy to say with the demise of papers and magazines and all that this is not a good time to go into the business. But actually, I don't believe it. I think that for one thing, you can create your own vehicle so people see your photographs. I mean, you have social media. Instagram's probably the best one, really, for photographers, even though I do Facebook and Twitter.
Right.
I like Instagram a lot. So you have an ongoing showcase. But I think a good photography starts here. It starts in your heart and why do you want to do this? What is it you want to show people that they don't see, that you see? And maybe it's a unique point of view. Whether anything from, the plight of the homeless to being bullied to just photographing interesting people. So I would highly recommend anybody try it out. I mean, I think I didn't have a roadmap for it. But it was a different path. I don't know that you could get on that same path now. It might be a little more difficult. There are just fewer outlets for it. In the second part, what was the second question? Well,
with regards to just actually learning photography. Somebody has just picked up their first camera like you did and taken a picture of their cat, but they're passionate. They've got the bug. What advice do you give them?
And that's the key. And going back to the earlier part of this conversation about just hitting rock and roll on your camera and shooting a lot of frames, is not the way to do it. The way to do it is just ask yourself, why am I going to take this picture? Do I like the composition? Do I like the subject matter? Are all these things coming together? What is it? What are you trying to say with your camera?
Mhm.
But the way to do that is to go out and shoot. And I certainly recommend shooting a lot and walking around and trying to find out what interests you. Now, in my case, I'm interested by almost everything, so it's real easy.
Right.
But and then people will look at your work, and everybody can rise above to a different place. Like one of my sons is a violinist. He's a professional. He went to USC.
Yep.
And of course, all of his gigs have been canceled lately, along with everything else. My youngest son's graduated from UC Berkeley. He speaks fluent Mandarin.
Wow.
He's getting 2 degrees, one in Chinese, one in anthropology.
Okay.
And he wants to go on into a more academic world, maybe get a PhD and do studies around the world. He's lived in China and all that. But it's a follow your passion thing. That's a cliche to a degree, but it's really true. I mean, you shouldn't go into anything just because it's easy. And photography was easy for me, but then there was a different level to that, where I was taking it to some place where I could show people what I was seeing in places they would never want to go or shouldn't go. And I was willing to do that. I mean, that's been my professional, the ignition point for me. My trajectory has been that, like as a news guy, news photographer.
Well, David, I don't even know how to thank you enough, really, for your time. You have been an incredible inspiration to me, and I know to many, many other photographers. Thank you so much for spending this time chatting with me. Obviously, stay safe throughout the rest of this whole virus situation that we're in, because I know I, for one, at least look forward to the images and the history that you are yet to record. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And hopefully you can get more than 5 or 6 minutes out of this thing.
I'll trust. Wow. Right? Wow. First of all, indeed, Mr. Kennerly was incredibly gracious with his time, and I have a feeling if I would have kept talking and kept listening that he would have just gone on. It was really, really tempting to take advantage of that. But I hope for those of you that have watched this, I hope that at some point when you have a few moments that you'll do 2 things. Number one, go and look through Kennerly.com, his website, and read about his career. And then also go and take a look at the Kennerly archives and another resource that I'm going to show you, because there's this whole other resource that's available that is amazing. So stay tuned for a second. But I hope that, number one, you will do some of that research about the history. And then I hope you'll go back and actually listen to his stories again. There's just an incredible amount of information for any kind of a photographer to be able to unpack from that conversation. Even his statement at the end when he was giving advice, where he talked about being able to show the world something through your eyes in your own unique way. Look, I by no means can put myself on the level of Mr. David Hume Kennerly, but how many times do you guys hear me kind of jokingly say, stay off of YouTube, stop doing the stuff that you see everybody else do? You know, that's okay as a learning exercise, because unlike when he learned photography, when I learned photography, we have all these really, really cool resources available. But you've got to make it personal. You've got to have a reason for doing it, a passion. And that, I've never met a person who was happy because their reason was to copy somebody else or to copy something else. It's like, that's boring, right? So anyway, honestly, that was really a highlight of my career. I'm not going to lie. So a lot of you have asked along the way about my old newspaper pictures and my old photography. So I actually cleared my schedule today and I went through these sealed bins that I have had for years. It's not necessarily the best archival system, but it works and it preserves things really fairly well. So the night that I got to see, Eric, thank you so much, man, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. The night that I got to see Mr. Kennerly in person, I was 16 years old. It was during the presidential campaign where Ford was running for re-election after his short 2.5-year term, and he was running against Jimmy Carter. He came to a shopping mall in Pennsylvania called Plymouth Meeting Mall. It's a real tiny little mall, 2 levels, but small mall. And I didn't even have a driver's license yet. So I hope he's still here because I know he was planning on watching early. But a friend of mine from school who went on to have his own very impressive newspaper photojournalism career, Mr. Randy, or professionally Randall Wolf. He now lives in Virginia, but he was a year ahead of me in school. He had a car and a driver's license. So we left school at the end of the school day and drove to Plymouth Meeting. And basically were able to get right down front, right at the rope line. And back then, of course, they allowed people much closer to presidents and things like that than they do now. And we waited until President Ford arrived for his talk. And of course, when we got there, we saw that in the back of this area, this big kind of open court in the shopping mall, there were risers, for the press photographers and the television people and that. And this mall packed itself by the time Ford arrived, and he was running late. This was one of those like late in the campaign stops. This was October 27th, right? So this was late in the campaign, and it was a tough race between him and Carter that year. So he had made literally 4 or 5 stops earlier that day before he arrived at this shopping mall. And by the time he got there, he was late. The mall was packed. There were so many people in the upper level. Literally, you could see the upper level, bouncing the way people were, on the bridges that were across. So my hope was, because I had studied lots of newspaper photography and because I had, looked at lots of pictures, my goal was to get a photograph that was kind of like the perfect political talking head. What's that mean? I knew that I was going to have the president standing at a podium because the podium was right there with the presidential seal on it. So the idea is when you're photographing that politician, you're waiting for the gestures. It's like when they're making their big campaign points. Well, turns out Gerald Ford wasn't a big gesturer when he spoke. He did come, up onto the stage and he waved, when he came up and he did things like that. But once he got behind the podium, I was right in front of the podium, like not even 10 feet away. The challenge with that is he was on a small riser stage, so I was below him. So it was almost impossible to get a gesture. So, here, I'll show you one of the pictures first. So here's the gesture that I got from behind the podium. So this is one of my shots of Gerald Ford. If you look close, his finger's pointing up. He's gesturing, okay? So I got the gesture, all right? But that's the shot. So the story, which I've told you guys before, is the chief photographer of my local hometown newspaper. His name was Willard Kriebel. He was a very kind mentor to me. And at the time, my friend Randy, who drove me, was on a career study program where half of every day in school he would go and he would work at the Reporter. What I would do, since I was a year below that and I did not have that opportunity to actually work there yet, is whenever I got really cool pictures, I would put them in an envelope, drop them at the front desk of the newspaper. And then I would go back a couple days later, and Mr. Kriebel would take the images. On the back of them, he would give me feedback. He would write notes, put them back in the envelope, send them back down to the desk. So I was excited about these pictures. Randy drove me back home after this event. I went in my darkroom. I stayed up late that night. It was a school night. I developed the pictures. It was a Wednesday night. I developed the pictures, and then the next morning on my way to school, dropped them off in an envelope at the Reporter, just because I was excited. I knew Randy was there. Randy to this day probably holds it against me. I don't know, maybe he didn't process his film. But I come home from school the next day, and here are 2 of my photos that are on the front page. The name of my small town paper is the North Penn Reporter. It's 2 of my photos. The picture here where you see Ford holding up the Villanova shirt, this was taken by one of the staff photographers at the paper. And the reason my pictures wound up being run, and these went out as Associated Press photos, they were my first AP Wire photos. It was because of this story. For whatever reason, and it's, probably a little bit of that political payback stuff, the White House kicked all the media out of this particular event. So Randy and I were actually the only two photographers other than David Hume Kennerly, and one of his other White House staff was there, and I don't know the gentleman's full name, but the last name was Thomas. He was the other White House shooter, and I'll show you how I know that in a minute. It's so cool. Mr. Kennerly showed me this resource. So that's how it happened, literally. There was a moment when David Kennerly came in. John, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. When David Kennerly came in, he came in on one side of the room and, just in front of the stage, and he took a couple pictures. And I noticed he didn't take, tons and tons and tons of pictures. He would stop, he'd take a picture, he'd move, he'd take a picture, etc. At one point, he stepped right in front of me, and I was kind of irritated, but at the same time kind of in awe, like, oh my God, David Hume Kennerly just blocked my shot. I can't take a picture because he's in front of me now. And then he moved on. He literally took one frame. I heard the click. He took one frame, and he moved on. Never thought a thing about it until yesterday. So I'll give you two more pieces of my story, and then I want to show you this resource. So after this happened, and this is why you have to be resourceful, folks. You've always got to be looking for opportunity if you want to make a career as a photographer. After this happened, the city desk editor for the newspaper called me, basically just to congratulate me and say, hey, really great job. You did a good job on the pictures. Thank you. I didn't skip a beat. I knew from the newspaper that the following week, Jimmy Carter, who was the Democratic candidate, was going to be coming to Philadelphia. There is a tradition that happens in Philadelphia for every political campaign, for presidential campaign, where the Democratic candidate does an outdoor rally at the intersections of 15th and Market Streets. So I knew this was going to happen. So when the city editor called me to thank me for the pictures, before I let him off the phone, I said, so since you're happy with me, how about if you get me credentials and let me go shoot Jimmy Carter? Now, keep in mind, my newspaper at the time had a great staff, knew what they were doing, award-winning, etc. He got me credentials, and I got to go because they normally wouldn't go into the city of Philadelphia to cover this event. So he arranged for me to get credentials. So I had Secret Service credentials to be able to shoot on the press platform. So they build a stage on the corner of this intersection in the city. It's not a particularly big space. They build a stage on the corner, and across the street on the other side, they put the press platform. I got down there really, really early that day, and turned out I didn't like the perspective from the press platform because I also didn't have those super long lenses. I was still like in high school, right? So I wound up saying, to heck with it. I'm here early enough. Even though I had Secret Service credentials, I got down in the crowd right in front of the stage. And then later that day, Jimmy Carter came. And this is just one of the images I was able to find. Actually, one of my favorite shots that I have of Jimmy Carter. And I will try and find it for you guys. It was taken with a wide-angle lens at the end of his talk. He reached down practically over me as he was shaking hands. And so I'm shooting with a 24 millimeter looking up at him as he's reaching over. And so that's how that happened. So if you guys want to have a really good laugh, just so that you can kind of get the full image of me doing these pictures in 1976. See the resemblance? That was me in 1976. So there you go, okay? All right, so now here's this cool resource. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'll share the link with you also, because this is amazing. So for any of you, especially if you're here in the U.S., and if you're old enough, if by any chance you saw in person President Gerald R. Ford at any kind of an event during the 2.5 years of his presidency, so this is during the time that he was president, the Gerald R. Ford Library, which is in Michigan, they have scanned and archived every single photograph that not only David Hume Kennerly took, but also all of the rest of his staff of White House photographers took during that time period, which is so cool. You can search by dates. You can search by locations. So I was able to go in, and I was able to find 3 rolls of film, 2 of which were shot by David Kennerly, 1 of which was shot by the photographer with the last name of Thomas. I have not figured out the full name of this photographer yet. But to give you kind of a sense of the setup, and I'm going to blow this up here. So also, just to give you a sense of what Mr. Kennerly was talking about how he doesn't fire off tons of frames. So let me point out to you, here he is, he's over 2 years into his job as the chief White House photographer. This contact sheet that you're seeing in this roll of film, this represents pictures from a television station in Philadelphia that Ford visited earlier in the day. It represents some private meetings that he had with some donors. It represents a stop that he made at a college, Villanova College, just outside of Philadelphia. That's where you see the top of the President Ford 76 banner here and talking to these people. And then it represents, on this particular roll of film, just one image from the, whoops, and I went way too big, but that's right, we're going to go down. It represents just one image from the campaign event, which was right here, okay? So this is at the shopping mall. I would have been just to the right of the frame, out of the frame, in front of where you see the Secret Service guy. I'm going to switch to a different roll of film, and again, we have pictures from in Philadelphia, some various meetings that he had. Here are the talking head photos that Kennerly shot during the speech. So these pictures are being taken at the same time that I'm photographing Ford. Okay? In fact, for all we know, that might be the shot that I got, and I hit it too early. Hard to say, but clearly he's got a gesture, but it's the same hand, the same finger. Okay? And then there's another one back here. Let's go back to here. There's another kind of an off-angle shot. All right? And then after that, they went to a place that no longer exists in Philadelphia, but if any of you are from the Philadelphia area, you may remember the Valley Forge Music Fair. That was that theater in the round. So another roll of film here. Again, this is the TV station stuff. This is a few pictures from the stop that he made at Villanova. This is outside the shopping mall here where you're seeing the car. So let me come down here to where we see the picture of the car. Whoops, am I off by one? Yes, that's a picture car. That's outside the shopping mall. All the people lined up on the road. And then he comes into the shopping mall. So, like, here you can see, I have my print. On the right side, you can see the curtains that you see, in my shot there, okay? And then if we go back down to the other side of the row, so these are off on the right side of the stage. So this would be camera right to where I was standing. Profiles to the stage, etc. And there's another roll of film which I was not able to find right before I came on board. So here's another shot here too that shows kind of how this was all decorated. So the people were like literally right here. And when I first saw it, and I'm still not sure, so Randy, if you're still watching, I honestly think that this guy here, and it's hard to see it in this view, but if you look at it at home and blow it up, I honestly think this is my friend Randy that's right here. It looks a whole lot like him, but he doesn't have a camera in his hand, and that's why I'm not sure about it. So, but anyway, so if you ever saw President Gerald Ford during his presidency, there's like a really, really good chance that you could maybe be in a picture. If you got to shake his hand or interact with him, you could be in a picture that was taken by David Hume Kennerly or one of the other White House photographers, and it's online. It's available, it's just amazing. And I don't know for a fact, David was talking about this at the end of our conversation before we signed off, and I didn't realize just how in-depth it was until after I said goodbye. I'm curious if they have done this or are doing this for future presidencies that have come since Ford. I hope they have, because it's an incredible piece of history that's being documented. So anyway, that's that. So I promise you guys I'd still do a few questions. It's almost time, but I only have a couple questions, so that's good, right? We'll make that work. So Kevin's got a question here. I noticed in your videos that you use CF and tend to expose to the left. Olympus people advise shoot to the right. Can you share your thoughts on this? Yeah. forget expose right, expose left. It's all a bunch of crap. I don't shoot to the left, Kevin. I don't know where you get that from. Probably because you thought it would be a good idea to look at a histogram, which is a really stupid idea, right? Here's why. If you look at the photography that I do, the overwhelming majority of it, you're never going to get a histogram in the middle, ever. It's because it's too extreme, right? So looking at a histogram is ridiculous. Stop with the whole left, right, etc. You definitely don't want to go to the left. And you know, I always get confused even which is which. Don't underexpose. Let's put it that way, okay? Absolutely do not underexpose. The bottom line is, I don't care what camera you use. I don't care what size the sensor is. Proper exposure. Proper exposure is the way to do it. Get your exposure right, and then it doesn't matter if you're shooting left or right. You know, again, this is a stupid YouTube thing. Take some lessons from what you heard from Mr. Kennerly tonight, okay? Take some lessons by what you can learn actually by looking through his contact sheets. It's about moments. It's about what's in front of your camera. Do it right the first time and you're done. Boom, there it is. That's it, right? I mean, that's the key. So, you know, I understand where your question's coming from. People talk about it all the time, and sorry if I came off a bit harsh there, Kevin, but I give the same answer every time this question comes up. Stop looking at the damn histogram. Look at your pictures. Kevin, you're probably a mirrorless shooter. So, if you're a mirrorless shooter, why in the world do you need a histogram? Like, what makes the histogram important to you? Now, are there types of photography where the histogram could be important? Oh, absolutely. Yes. But if you're following me, you're probably not shooting those kinds of photography, those kinds of images, right? If you're photographing people, if you're photographing, honestly, almost anything aside from stuff that has a really, really, really high tolerance in terms of how it's going to be reproduced. And if you're one of those photographers, like legit, like that's how you're making your living, you're not following me. You're just not, because you've already learned beyond that stuff. So, yeah, that's totally a spend less time on YouTube thing, okay? William Wright, if I use a lens adapter, will focus peaking still work? William, you got to help me out there, man. What camera, what lens adapter? In all likelihood, probably not. Sean, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the super chat. William, probably not. In most cases, you're going to lose features like that, but it depends on the brand camera, the lens, and all that kind of stuff. So if you can sneak that in there really quick. I'm just squeezing right back here. Oh, Michael. So actually, Michael, I will tell you this. He said here, probably not enough time today. You're right. But I would love to see your workflow from the shot to the finished image. I can come close to that for you now, tomorrow night. Let me get it up on the computer here, and I'll show you, because there's still time for you to sign up. I'm going to switch my screen over, and if you visit my website, click on the Speaking and Events tab. When the calendar loads, the very first one, it's tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. The Secret Powers of Raw Files, How to Get the Most Out of Your Raw Digital Files, is a free, there's the cool word, free webinar. And it will show you all about how I do basically my developing portion of all of my images. I'm not doing compositing and all that kind of stuff, but it'll help you out. And I can guarantee you, for most people, some of the things that I'm going to cover in there, some of the things I'm going to show you, they're an eye-opener. They're things that they're not routinely talked about, they're not routinely taught, but they're big time savers. And really, really helpful. So if you can make it, I would encourage you to, definitely sign up. And I'll give you a little hint. Even if you can't make it tomorrow night, but you want to see it, sign up for it. It's free. You will receive an email about an hour after the event with a link to watch the replay. That link will stay accessible for 48 hours. So you'll have 2 days after 7:30 tomorrow night to be able to watch it. Okay? So, whoops, sorry. With that, wrong button there. There we go. So, let's see here. Now everybody's typing questions. Okay, so, Chad Baker. Let's see, where'd it go here? Fellow Olympus shooter coming from Canon after many years. What made you decide to jump from Nikon to Olympus? Wow, you guys must not watch my YouTube videos. So Chad, on my YouTube channel, let me grab the link here for you. I've actually done a few videos that tackle that one in particular that's like all about it. Let's just see here really quick, and there it is. I'll get you the link and I'll share it with you so you can see, instead of me answering all of that here, okay? There you go. So there's the link for that one. Let's see. Where are we at here? Sorry. Alvin, Joe, to be honest, you worked hard to get the photos and then worked late to process the image and made it in the news. No luck. Well, you know, it's interesting you said that, Alvin. I mean, first of all, thank you. I realize that's a compliment. One of the things that, if you listen to David Kennerly tonight in his interview, and I said this before, I used the word lucky. He even, I think, used the word lucky once or twice tonight. The goal is, or the idea, or maybe the ideal scenario is to create your own luck. I cannot remember it, so I'm not even going to try and paraphrase it, but there's a very famous quote from Thomas Jefferson, actually, of all people, about luck. And the gist of it is, you know, you create your own luck. Hard work creates that luck. The great part about what I do, and I certainly can't speak for David Kennerly, but I think he is in a similar situation, in a completely different universe, okay, but it's kind of not work, you know. I am blessed to be able to do what I do, and yeah, certainly it wasn't a gift. I work hard for this gift, and I continue to work hard, but certainly life could have, you know, life could have had a whole lot of different paths. So yeah, but I appreciate that, but I'm a big one in, you know, in kind of the idea of making your own luck. So anyway, gang, that being said, we're just after 7:30. I'm late as always. I am going to wrap things up. So remember, I've got a webinar coming up tomorrow night, which is The Secret Powers of Raw. That's free. For those of you that are trying to make money on your website, and you know what? How stupid am I? I showed you the link and I didn't share the link. Gosh, you know, really bad, Joe. There you go. So there's the link for The Secret Powers of Raw. Also, if you are trying to make money as a photographer, you might want to consider Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock. I have a webinar called How to Make a Photography Website That Gets You Noticed. And then 2 weeks down the road, I've got one that's all about social media for photographers, because most photographers suck at social media. Yeah, you do. And I'll prove it to you. Okay? So anyway, check those out. They're coming up. Next Wednesday, of course, we'll be back for TOGCHAT. This weekend, I'll be doing a top 10 in my group. And I do have a couple other interviews in the work. So with some people that are also, I am confident, going to be equally as good storytellers and very, very willing to really drop some knowledge and some great advice from their decades of experience. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, gang, as always, thank you so much for your support. And of course, whatever you do, please remember these words.
Thanks for watching another live episode of TOGCHAT. Now, pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot is your next shot. So keep learning, keep thinking, and keep shooting. Adios.